Here now is your host, Hal Sundstrom with Les Canavan.
Well, Leslie, we all have a start, a beginning. What say you?
Well, there are several starts. Where would you like to pick it up?
Well, one thing I'd like to clarify, you are a United States Army veteran.
Yes.
And you outranked me by a couple of years.
Oh, okay.
So I understand you served 4 years in the regular Army.
Right.
How did that come about?
Well, it really came about because when I was a kid and got out of high school, I had just turned 16, and I couldn't buy a car. I couldn't own anything, and I never had parents. I just sort of grew up, one of those things. So my only outlet was to go in service. And actually, I would have gone in the Marines, but you had to be 21. So when I was 18, I went in the Army. Promised to be a surgical tech. Got orders for Texas, and then some idiot up in, well, I shouldn't say that, but in the Pentagon decided the best thing to do was to get a whole woman's Army unit together as mechanics and ship them to Berlin, and then that would free all those guys who were working in the garage, so to speak, in Berlin, and then somebody pointed out that those guys couldn't handle a gun. So after I got all my shots, I went nowhere and ended up in the motor pool.
So you were over there after the war ended in the Army of Occupation?
No, I didn't get over there.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, you didn't get over there?
No, I just got all the shots, all the intentions, and then they said, well, that was not a good idea.
Right.
So
then they're done that.
Yeah.
So at some point, did you tell me earlier that you were a graduate at Cornell?
No, unfortunately, when I could have gone to college, you had to, it was another reason I went in the Army, you had to be able to insure the finances for the first year. And I had no parents and no, anything. So the Army seemed like the only place that they wanted me. So that's what I ended up.
Well, the next logical question is, how did you become interested in the Collie?
I always was interested in the Collie. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be a veterinarian, so I spent my summers working in a dairy farm, building up, a history to get into Cornell or something like that. And as luck would have it, I qualified for the scholarship, but I was against a woman from my own, youngster from my own school, but her mother was a Cornell graduate, so that gave her all the counts, so.
But all those experiences stood you in good stead for what became more than a half-century career in the sport and in the breed.
Right.
I would like to now ask you what spawned and sparked your interest in Collies.
I probably Terrier, like everybody else. I'm sure I read all his books, and it just appeals to me.
Did you have anyone that introduced you to the breed or to the sport?
Not really at that phase. I just was interested myself, and when I went in service, I had already bred some Collies before I went in service, and I didn't know any better, so I took him with me.
See, now that's an aspect that none of us know about you.
Oh.
So it began really quite some time ago.
Oh, yeah.
When did you, as I remember, have the kennel name Conway Collies?
Oh, Canway.
What was that?
Canway.
Canway. All right.
Yeah,
now,
that's...
Where was this?
Yeah, actually it was a registered kennel name.
All right.
After I got out of school, I moved up to Connecticut, and I had to have a collie, and I bought a collie, and that right away I had to have a kennel name. You know, what would you do without one? So that's what I did, and that was Canway, my first litter. And I think about it now, I was probably crazy. I was acting as a nanny, and I just brought the dogs along, and I bred them, and we had a litter up there. I went up to Ed Pickard's. Pickard had just moved from Minnesota then, and he was up in Connecticut, and he was up in the hill country, and I had a beat-up old pickup truck, and unfortunately, the only way I could go up through the hills was to carry a case of oil. So I drove along, and as soon as the oil gauge got fluctuating too badly, I pulled over on the side and put in a quart of oil.
I think you paid your dues.
Yeah. And went up there, and when I got up there, it was really funny because I had been working on a dairy farm, and Ed had a cow that was calving. So when I drove in with my beat-up old pickup truck that he was laughing at me for, he said to me, "Oh, where'd you come from?" And I said, "I came from such and such a town. I work on a dairy farm there." And he said, "Great, I need you. Come out." So I went out, and he had a cow that was calving. So I helped him with the calving. You know, no great amount, but the funny part about it was that after Verna and I got together and we got to comparing notes, she went up there about 3 weeks later, bred as I did to Star Mist, and Ed was telling her about this crazy kid who came up in the pickup truck spewing oil and helped him with the cow, you know.
Now you have to tell our viewers, who is Ed Pickard?
Oh, God. If you don't know him, you don't know Collies.
Well, unfortunately, we have a lot of newcomers to the breed and to our
Yeah,
family.
And I think the worst of it today is they're not really as interested as we all were. You know, I wanted to know who'd been in Collies before and what they had.
Right.
And Ed was Sterling Kennels, and he had just moved east. And I will never forget driving into his place because he had a little office that had a pond in front of it and a little bridge. And when I drove in, I was going to breed the Star Mist. He came out, and it was like the proverbial Terrier picture. All these collies came bounding out with him, and I was, you know, I would have bred to anything at that stage of the game.
I think we've all been there and done that. In your early years, what kennels did you visit, and what kennels most impressed you?
Well, I think if you go back into the 50s and 60s, summertime meant we all got together and we went kennel hopping, and it was fascinating. We did Callan, we did Poplar, we did, of course, the Island kennels, Mrs. Long and Mrs. Gray, but it was what you did in the summer, you know. And at that stage of the game, anything that was a collie impressed me.
Now, when do you feel that your breeding program really got into full swing?
Well, I would say, that's hard to say because wherever I went, I took my dogs with me, right? And whether I had a one room that I was renting or not, the dogs went along. And we had, as I said again, after I met Verna and we eventually got together, I found out she had also bred at Favordale within about a month of the time that I did. So I was breeding wherever I lived. And I think about it now, I didn't even know where I was going to whelp them, but we did it.
And when did Royal Rock come into the picture?
Well, I bought a bitch from Mrs. Browning, which was kind of a funny thing. I was getting out of service, so I got in touch with Mrs. Browning about buying a bitch. And I had a pickup. Yeah, I had a pickup truck then. So she said that she had this nice, I think she said 7 or 8 month old collie that she would sell. And from there, somehow it digressed to would I like to work for her? And we went through that, and presumably, after I got out, I was going to go up and work for her. But in the meantime, she shipped me this bitch. And I went to the airport, and I picked up the bitch, and I put her in the car, and I was working at a 5-gated stable at the time. So, and it was in Richmond. So we had some horses down on the James River. So on my way back, I took her and we went down to the James River. And when I pulled up, it was kind of weird, you know, because I'm looking at this collie and she's friendly. She looked older than that, but Tocallan dogs aged fast, you know. And I take her out and she's right at my heel. You know, and I have to lead on her. And I go out there and I'm sort of checking the horses, and she sort of pulled loose. And she goes out and she rounds them up. And it was like, you know, boy, Mrs. Browning really is something, yeah. So by the time I got back to the house, the guy I was working for came out and he said, there is some crazy woman on the phone and she's screeching and screaming. I can't understand her. Well, the upshot of the whole thing was that Mrs. Browning sent her help to the railroad station to ship 3 bitches. And he got the tags all mixed up. So I got this one that had been shipped in for breeding from, I think, Arizona. And she was, you know, a herding dog that they shipped to Mrs. Browning for breeding. And she said to me, well, which one do you have? And I said, I don't know. You know, I have what you shipped me, right? So it turned out that when I told her that, she realized it was that one. But the hooker was, that man said to her when she called him, no way do I return this puppy that I have until I get my bitch back. And, you know, in those days, shipping by rail was long. So I took her down right away. I made arrangements and I shipped her to, I think it was Oklahoma, I don't remember. And I called and I said to Mrs. Browning, I've shipped her, you know, I have the receipt and all, when will I get mine? She said he won't release her. But what he didn't do, he didn't pick her up. And she was there like 5 days and they shipped her to me. And she hadn't been out of the crate. They fed her and watered her. But thank God I had a pickup truck because that crate was so stinking, you know.
Well, since you brought up Mrs. Browning, perhaps it's a good time to talk about some of the other influential collie breeders that you associated with, that were maybe mentors, that you handled for.
Oh, well, then we're going way ahead in time.
That's way ahead in time.
Yeah.
Well, let's pick up your story where you want to pick it up.
I'm just saying.
It's your conversation.
Yeah. It's just that and anybody who knew Mrs. Browning's stuff, I think that bitch, when I got her, I don't know whether it was because she had been in the crate for so many days, you know, but she was the only one at that time, I think, that Mrs. Browning sold that had a lovely temperament, and she was rock solid, but I think part of it was the whole thing of being shipped.
At what point did you start professionally handling?
Oh, well, I have to go back on that
Go ahead.
one. That when I got out of service, I was as I said before, I was presumably going to work for Mrs. Browning. And when I hit Long Island and I visited some friends, they said, God, don't go work for Mrs. Browning. You can get a job anywhere here. So I said, okay, I'll make you a deal. That looks like a plant up there. I'll stop and see if I can get a job. If I get a job, then I'll stay on the island. So I walked in, applied for a job, and they said, fine, you can start Monday. So I had to call Mrs. Browning. And the odd thing about it was years later, after I was handling and all, we went to the Westminster and came across Mrs. Browning, who was sitting on one of the benches. And we stopped, at that time, Verna and I, and said, how are you doing, and she said, I'm just so discouraged. She said, I went to the Collie section and no one knew me. And we said, well, we know you,
Yes.
And it sort of was a little on the sad side that
Right.
she did and was completely out of it. But then when I went to breed that bitch after I had gotten out of service, and I went to Edith Levine's, and anyone who knows Edith, she was quite a character. And I guess you're young and you're brash, but she showed me her stud dogs. And I said, gee, Mrs. Levine, I really don't care for them. When I was 20 years older, I wouldn't have been able to say it to her, but I did then. And she said to me, oh, well, then go out and see Mrs. Allen. Maybe she'll have something that'll please you, And years later, she used to say, Les came to my place, and she said, the next thing I knew, they were Royal Rock Collies out there. So she took full credit. But as I said, I went out, and that's how I met Verna, and Royal Rock was her kennel name.
Your professional career has included, in addition to what we've already related, judging, collies, and other breeds. What other breeds have you judged?
I don't judge that many others. I just do Shelties.
Just Shelties.
When I quit handling, I was really impressed with that, because a couple of people, including Ralph Morrison and somebody else, wrote in and said that, with the experience I had judging, they ought to give me the whole herding group,
Right.
And I said to the AKC, I'm getting out of handling because I'm not going out every weekend, and I said I wasn't interested. I just wanted collies and Shelties, and we had raised Shelties also.
Now, you and Verna were really renowned for not only your Royal Rock Collies, but Norwich Terriers that were big winners.
Yeah.
Tell me about some of those big wins.
Well,
Your choice.
Yeah. Verna wanted a smaller breed, and we went into Norwich. And the Norwich group at that time was a very odd little group. They were elderly, very, shall I say, sporting type women in tweeds and the whole 9 yards. So I was already handling then, and we decided, I said to Verna, if we're going to go into it, I should bypass that. We bought a bitch, and from a leading kennel, and she was nothing of what we wanted, so we sold her for a pet. And then we were looking for another one, and we bought a bitch, and it just wasn't meant to be. The day she was 6 months old, she had a massive epileptic attack. I took her to the vets, and she died on the table. So we got in touch with Mrs. Long, said, see Mrs. Reed. So we went to Mrs. Reed, and that's how we got into Norwich. We got a dog through Mrs. Reed. And it was a funny thing, because at that time we tried to join the Norwich Club, because we figured, it's the thing you do. and nobody would sign for us. So we had a litter that the dog who changed Norwich's came out of, and his litter sister I took and I showed at Philadelphia, and it was a big Norwich specialty. And it was really funny because I came out of the ring and I went winner's bitch and best of winners for 5 points. So when I got back to the bench, there were two of these Norwich ladies standing there, and they said to me, "Why don't you two belong to the Norwich Club?" And I said, "Because nobody would give us an application." And she turned around and she said, "We've already filled it out and you're members." She said, "You can't come here and win a 5-point major and not be members."
You all weren't wearing Creed.
No, we weren't. No, but that dog went ahead, and in fact, last year when they were doing the write-up, he's the only dog to have sired 2 Westminster winners out of different bitches.
Fabulous.
So he had it, and he was by a British import that nobody liked, and we thought he was the ideal thing. I remember I called Peter Green about breeding to him, and he said, "I don't know how it'll work out, Les," because we were in the ring
and
as handlers.
He was a very noted handler.
Oh, yeah. But I was a PHA member then, too,
right.
So
right.
I called Peter, and Peter said, he's only going to be home one day, and then he's going back out on the road because they were campaigning him. So I said to him, "Okay, I'll see you next Wednesday," or whatever it is. Took her down, bred her once, and she had 2 puppies, and it was meant to be, one of those things.
Right.
And that was Royal Rock Don of Chidley. And when they were born, Verna thought that she liked the male. And I said, "Look, we've got Collies. We don't need another stud dog,
Right.
So we took it over. Mrs. Reed had gotten us a bitch when we were going through all this thing, and she wanted just a puppy return sometime in the future, because she was afraid Verna was going to go out of them,
right.
after all the bad. So we went over there, and she looked at the 2, and we had stopped at one of the terrier handlers, and he had looked at them, and he liked both of them, but he thought the male could be a little better in front. So we went on over to Mrs. Reed, and she looked at the pair of them, and she said, "You keeping one?" I said, "Well, we're definitely keeping the bitch." So she said, "Oh, okay," and I went home, and she called me in about 6-7 days, and she said, "You might sell that male," and I said, "Sure," and she said, "How about I take him for my puppy?" And I said, "Great," I said, "We're not going to keep him," because I didn't want to go into stud dogs in Norwich. And he is the dog that went ahead and sired the 2 Westminster winners. He changed the breed completely,
Now to get back to Collies.
Yeah.
What are your notable successes with Collies? And I know there were many.
As what, though?
Well, as handler, as breeder.
Well, it was
important wins, important shows.
As handler, I we had Hawk, although that's another.
Tell us about Black Hawk and Kazan,
right?
And Sandy Tuttle.
Yeah, well,
that was historic.
Oh, it
record breaking.
Well, at the time I was handling, and a lot of the smooth people in the East at that time were having a few difficulties, and the smooths weren't great. So a couple of them came to me and said, "Hey, Les, you go all around the country. If you ever see a decent male, see if you can get him on lease and bring him back here." So I said, okay, and I thought, So I was going to the CC of A in Southern Cal, and Janet was with me, and we were going up the steps of the show ground. And
you mentioned Janet. Janet who?
Leak.
Okay.
Yeah, Janet Leak. And when we went up, there was a black smooth in front of us. And I turned around to Janet and I said, there goes Winter's dog and Smooth. And she said, oh, don't be so smart. She said, you haven't seen another Smooth on the plate. Why would you say a stupid thing like that? And I said, because that's the best Smooth I ever saw. So we went on about our day, and then I guess we were going out to dinner, and she said, hey, did you check and see how that Smooth did? And I said, no, I didn't think of him again. And she said, well, you're so smart, let's go find out what he did. Well, he went best of winners from the puppy class, and she had to buy dinner, which was good. But what happened was I was judging in about 3 months after that in California. That was when handlers could judge. So I had gone home, and Verna hadn't been with us on that trip, so I told her all about Hawk. And this Try Smooth and how great he was and all that. So she said, oh, well, when you go to California, then I'm going with you because I want to see this great Smooth. So we go out there, and I'm judging, and I did put a Try Smooth up. And she called me over, and I came over, and I said, okay, what's the matter? And she said, that's a Smooth, but that's no great Smooth. And I said, that's not the dog I was talking about. So after we did Smooths, I did Roughs, and as luck would have it, I put Sandy Tuttle, best of breed, with Hawk's sire. So we're standing there getting pictures taken, and I said to her, where are you from? And she said, oh, we're from San Francisco. I said, oh, well. I said, do you know who owned that black dog that was at the CC of A and went Winter's dog from the puppy class? And she said, that's me. And I said, oh, you're kidding. And she said, no. So I said, fine. And I go out back, and I said to Verna, you have to see this dog. So we left there, which was in Southern Cal. We went home with Sandy Tuttle, and Verna met Hawk. And the whole deal then was I wanted to bring him back to put him at stud. And it was really funny in the end of it, because Ada Shirley, I found out later on, called Sandy and said, you're not sending Hawk back east. And Sandy said, why not? And she said, they don't know a good dog if they saw one. Right. And don't trust them with Hawk. But thank God Sandy went by her own, inclinations. So I brought him back really that we were going to use him at stud. So while we were back there, I said to Sandy, if people want to see him, the best thing to do is show him at a few shows. I'm going anyway, I'm a handler. So that's what we did. And then he just caught on and started, hitting. But the funny part was the person who originally asked me to bring back a good Smooth got very annoyed because everybody bred to Hawk.
Well, Hawk's record-breaking win was at our national, and where was that national?
Massachusetts.
Do you remember the year?
I think it was 70, wasn't it?
He was a remarkable dog, an outstanding dog, and he went over one of the top roughs in the country.
Right.
From Lick Creek, Dorset Stern.
Right. Well, that was, in a way, it was a little unfair to the rough, but the thing was that Hawk was such a character.
Yeah.
I mean, we shipped him back, all the time, but we shipped him back and forth, and there were times I went to Kennedy to pick him up, and the guys there had turned him loose, and I went in one time, and when I said, gee, is anybody here? Hawk stands up on the other side of the counter,
Right.
And it's like, here I am, Mom, But now I lost my place. What was I telling you? We did bring him back, and we started handling, and he had a fan base almost. Right. So when we were showing him in Worcester, they waited until the end after he had won the breed, and they were all sitting there. And in all fairness, they had done the smooths first and the roughs later. So the rough had been through a lot, you know.
Right.
And it was Sven Jensen judging. And I knew Sven had already put up a winner's dog, a California dog. And I thought if I had any chance, which I probably didn't, we're sunk, you know. So when we got up there and I was getting ready to move him, I was sitting there and I'm trying to think, what do I do? So it suddenly hit me what to do. And I leaned over and I spoke to Hawk. Well, he went down and back like, you know, raring to go. He comes back and he skids to a halt in front of Sven. And Sven looked at me and he said, you know, I don't want to do this. And I said, thank you, sir.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
and when I took him over to the side, it was funny because Mrs. Long came over and she said, all right, I've watched you handled many a time, but what did you say to him? And I said, you noticed that? And she said, yeah. And the background on that was that Sandy Tuttle raised bantams, but Sandy Tuttle's neighbor raised fighting cocks. And Sandy was rather lax in where her chickens were. So I know I went out there several times where there were clutches on the front porch,
right.
and they were the cross.
Oh, boy.
And Sandy's mother was very, very soft-hearted.
Right.
So Sandy would wait until she was away, and then she'd take him out and get him to chase the chickens. So when I stood up there at the end and I wanted him to really, you know, put out, I just leaned over and said to him, Hawk, go get the chickens. And boy, he went down there looking for chickens.
Now, at this point, I'd like you to talk a little bit about Mrs. Long, Noranda Daily Double, Best in Show.
Yeah, I had Mrs. Long for a client. The prestige was worth all the
For the novice, who was Mrs. Long?
Oh, she was Noranda Kennels. Very well-to-do, had a lovely estate on the North Shore of Long Island. And I found out accidentally in later times that they owned the Noranda gold mines in Canada, and that's where the name came from. And that was only because I passed somebody at a show somewhere, and I said, oh, you must have had a Noranda dog because it said Noranda. And he said, no, I bought this at the gold mines. So, but she was a good person to learn from because she made no statement that wasn't challenged.
I have, as you know, because you and I discussed this earlier, I have a zillion questions I could ask you. I have to ask you about Grambling Man.
About who?
Grambling Man.
Oh, Gambling Man.
Gambling Man.
Oh.
There, I've got it right. Gambling Man.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, well, he was one that we bred, Verna and I. And we were sort of, Brian Carabine had Aaron's own kennels, and we were very friendly with him. And in a matter of fact, they called the puppy that we would go back and forth. They were, you know, a couple of towns over, and meet on a weekend or after work and show these little puppies from the time they were, you know, tiny things. And Brian's dog was built like a rock, and he was solid. And Tim was kind of lean and, you know, little on the racy side. And I can remember his wife saying to us, you know, if you two don't stop this over these two dogs, she said, you know, you have to fix a time when you're going to decide. So, as I said, we would go to matches, and because Brian had this little solid dog, he would win the matches. So Verna said to me, set a date and let's get this over with, because he registered in Royal Rock, Aaron's own competition. So we decided that the CC of A was going to be in Hartford, and whoever placed higher in the puppy class, because they were going to be about 7 months, or whoever stayed in the ring and wasn't cut, was going to be declared the better of the two, and that was the end of it. So we got up there, and we got into the ring, and I had Tim, gambling man, on the lead, and Van Dyke was judging, and he became fascinated with Van. He'd never seen anybody that tall, and you know Van, he was tall and thin, and wherever Van went in the ring, Tim was looking around me and looking for him, and there was really a lovely dog in there who should have won the 6 to 9 class, but Van put Tim up, and that put Brian out of the running, and that ended our competition. But years later, I met Van, and I said, you know, Van, I appreciated the win, but I said there was such a beautiful dog in there. And he said, do you know he never finished the other one? I said, yeah, but, you know. And he said, yeah, but you won in the group at Westminster with him. And he said, I just couldn't see it. And I said, well, you know, and he said, and you're criticizing my judging? And I said, well, yeah, because he was ready, you know. Right. But he put up 10. So, and then he got, I was working for United Aircraft, and I was in inspection, and I was working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. And I wanted to take Tim out, and I didn't have time to work with him. I took him up to Jack Warren's. And I got home, and, well, Verna and I went together, and we got home, and the next morning she came in to me, and she said, you know, I really feel like a novice, but I just have a bad feeling about Tim. And she said, would you call, you know, go ahead and call Jack. And I said, Verna, we just dropped him off yesterday. What am I going to say to him, you know? And she said, oh, just say you were just hoping he wasn't being a nuisance or something. And I called Jack, and he said, how did you know? And I said, how did I know what? And he said, he's gone. And I said, what do you mean he's gone? He said, well, long story, but my son always, they had a big exercise run out in the middle of this big field. And he said, my son went into the kennel and turned all the dogs loose, and he forgot that Tim hadn't been there before, and he took them all out to the field. And it wasn't until when he came back to pick it up, it dawned him the dog wasn't with him, because he didn't know. Yeah. So he was lost in a stretch up there for about 3, almost 4 months in dead of winter. And it was a summer camp and a forestry place with just a few homes in it. And we went up there on weekends and, you know, tried to find him. And a couple of people who did have homes in there, one woman said to us, oh, yeah, the pretty collie in the big full coat. She said, he hung around here for 2 or 3 days. And she said, I figured he was so pretty, I'd better chase him home, which is what she did.
You've just related a Lassie story scenario.
Yeah. It is.
I mean, it emphasizes something that is very true about the breed.
Yeah, well, he came back, I think he weighed 20 pounds.
Now, I have a list here of Royal Rock dogs. How many over the years?
Oh, God, I don't know. Well, I'll tell you, the big problem with some of these dogs is that I was handling, and I became a PHA member. Okay. And in those days, you did not handle your own dogs unless you took them out during the summer or something like that. And actually, it was one of the collie breeders' remarks that got me out of the handling, because somebody was talking about having seen one of our dogs and thought it was a pretty dog, and why didn't we show it, you know? And she said, well, if they had anything worth showing, they'd show it. So I went home to Verna and I said, hey, let's just quit the
That's
handling.
some of the vagaries of being in this sport.
Right. Right.
Now, I said in the introduction of you, that you had more than 50 years as breeder, exhibitor, handler, judge, analyst, moderator, writer, club official, and you were topped by a 2-brief presidency of our parent club in 2011. And then I said to you on the side that you probably would dispute that. Do you have any comment?
No, that I was not running. I had run for first vice president. I was first vice president for a number of years. It just was a situation where I got the office of president and I finished it out. And I didn't find out until Verna died recently that she got in touch with a couple of people and said, Les has enough to do. Don't talk her into running. So I didn't run.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, among other things, you received an honor from the Quarter Century Group, the Right Stuff Award, several years ago. And I think that emphasizes your contributions over the years. We're at Sunnybank today, and you were part of the action here today. And you've been doing this for some time, I understand.
Right.
And you have any observations?
No, only that I think Collies have been good to me, and I feel like I ought to pay it back.
What do you consider your most important and proud accomplishment?
I knew that question was going to come up, and I don't really look at it that way. I just feel if I can help somewhere or chip in and be of some use, as I said, I think I owe it to the breed because I've been in it all my life and had it everywhere with me.
Now, over the years, you've had a keen eye. You want to compare collie quality from when you began to what you're seeing today?
Well, I think all along, the good dogs are good dogs, and the top, whatever degree or percentage it is, are as good as they were years ago. But I also think some of the dogs years ago could compete today. But the thing is, back in the 50s and 60s, you could go in the ring and have a Roman-nosed dog come in. You could have a really badly, what shall I say, crippled dog that could hardly move. We had tremendous entries, but a lot of them were not good.
Right.
But I think the top dogs are top dogs.
Now, our members have paid you a very important compliment. And I understand you've judged our national 3 times.
Yeah.
Any particular recollection that you have about that experience?
Well, actually, I wrote a couple of years. The last time I judged it was in 2012, and I wrote in and asked that my name be removed from the list because I feel that I've done it 3 times. There are other people who are deserving, and I really didn't want to do it anymore. I enjoyed it. I got to judge. I had the votes, but I wasn't home. They called somebody else, so I had to start with males. Whoever I was tied with chose bitches, and of course I wrote bitches first. And then the next time I did bitches, and then the last time I did it, I did the whole thing. And I know I got some calls that said, we voted for you again to do the top and do it this time. So I did, and I really enjoyed it. You see the cream of the crop, and it's really, you see dogs in a way that, what shall I say, you don't get the opportunity, and you get to go over them all, and I really enjoyed it.
This would be a good point to address the newer members to our sport. Do you have any words of wisdom you'd like to impart?
Well, I'm president of the Collie Club of Long Island. We've been down there for 60 years. And I have some of the best working members I've ever had. But I and Verna were the only breeders, and Janet were the only breeders in the club. They do a lot of work, they raise money, they love the collie, but a lot of them have, in fact, one of our valued members said to me one day, someday tell me why you like collies. And I said, why would you ask me that? You have 2 collies, but they're 2 rescues. So I said to her, you're missing the better part of the breed. I admire you for taking these dogs in, but don't judge the breed by what you get in a rescue dog. And I think I don't know. I think back to when I started, and it seemed to me everybody was always griping about the newcomers and what they didn't know, and it makes me feel guilty at times. But I don't think they're as deeply into it. Some are. We have some really good dogs. We had some lovely dogs here today, too.
Now, I've been playing 20 questions with you.
Yeah.
Or more. Anything that you'd like to say at this point? Anything you think that we've glossed over, we've omitted?
Well, maybe in line with Verna, in that she had a kennel before I met her. As I say, we had bred the same dogs, peculiarly enough, before we ever met. And I went out there and actually, suitcase in hand and collie bitch, and I didn't know where I was going to live next, because I had the family that I was staying with, their mother decided to move back in, so I was out there. And Verna and I got together, and I think it must have been 6 years before we co-owned anything.
Right.
It was you own yours and I'll own mine, and we'll see.
Obviously, that was an important part of your life and your life
definitely.
Together.
Definitely.
I'd like to end this by complimenting you. You've had a remarkable career, and you've been a great contributor to our sport, our club, to our foundation. Thank you for this conversation.
Well, thank you for asking. And I just think it's something that I owe, and probably anyone who has gotten deeply into collies owes to the breed.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
It is going to be so hard to imagine the collie world without Les Canavan. It just seems like she was always around, whether it was breeding, handling, judging, writing, mentoring, or speaking. Her entire life seemed to revolve around collies. She truly did it all. Though she dabbled in several other breeds and indeed was very successful and influential in some, her lifelong love was the collie. She was a wealth of information on past dogs and older kennels, and she had some great stories that she loved to tell. She was easily the go-to person for questions on events or collies of the past. When Les spoke, people listened. As a person, Les was the epitome of honesty, integrity, and grace, and she generously shared her knowledge and experience with all, quietly and with dignity. She was a no-nonsense kind of person with a really great sense of humor. If ever there is a list of collie icons, most assuredly, Les's name will be close to the top.